regardless of religious teaching, they may not feel comfortable in signing up to it. But now the laws have changed about organ donation. And our speaker will explain to you about this. So it's a very important topic. We need to discuss this. We held a number of roundtable sessions before the lockdown with scholars and
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to Sylheti Online. আশা করি দেশ বিদেশ থেকে ভাই বোনেরা হচ্ছে যেখান থেকে আজকে আমরা লাইভে জয়েন হয়েছেন সকল ভালো আছেন দহরি ভালো থাকতে আলহামদুলিল্লাহ আমিও ভালো আছি আজকে আপনারা কাছে একটা প্রোগ্রাম লই আইছি যে প্রোগ্রামটা অত্যন্ত জরুরি আর খুব বেশি ইম্পর্টেন্ট স্পেশালি আমরা যারা মুসলমান এটা অবশ্যই জানা দরকার আমরা শরীরের যে একটা অঙ্গ আছে অনেক সময় আমরা শুনি যে অর্গান ডোনেশন যেটা আমরা শরীরের যে পার্ট আছে মানুষ মারা গেলে আমরা যে কিডনি আছে চোখ আছে কিংবা শরীরে অনেক জিনিস আছে এটা দেখা যায় অনেকে ডোনেশন করিয়া যায় স্পেশালি আমরা শুনি নিউজের মাঝে কিংবা পত্র পত্রিকার মাঝে তো ও ব্যাপারে আজকে আমরা ব্রিটেনের অনেক বড় বড় ডাক্তার প্লাস যারা সায়েন্টিস্ট আছেন তারা আইসেন এটার লই একটা আলাপ আলোচনা করবা তো প্রোগ্রামটা মেইনলি ইংলিশে হইব আর আপনারা দেখবা আর প্লিজ আপনারা এটা শেয়ার করে অন্যজনকে দেখার সুযোগ করে দিবা আমরা মুসলমান এটা জানা দরকার আমরা শরীরের অঙ্গ এটা দেওয়া ঠিক আছে নি জীবিত অবস্থায় কিংবা মরে যাওয়ার বাদে তো আপনারা একটু প্লিজ আজকের এই লাইভটা শেয়ার করিয়া অন্যজনকে দেখার সুযোগ করে দিবা আর জানাইবা সব কিছু ঠিক আছে ইনশাআল্লাহ আশা করি আপনারা আমরা লগে থাকবা প্রোগ্রামটার এন্ড পর্যন্ত হয়তো আপনারা শেয়ারের কারণে আপনারা এই অংশগ্রহণের কারণে আপনারা জানতে পারবা আর আপনার মাধ্যমে দুনিয়ার অনেক মুসলমান ভাই বোন হল আছেন তারাও জানতে পারবা সো প্লিজ আউকা আমরা প্রোগ্রামটা শুনি দেখি এর ভিতরে আমি মাঝে মধ্যে চেষ্টা করবো আমার ভাই বোন হলরে আনিয়া মাথাইতাম আপনারা তার কাছ থেকে শুনবা ইনশাআল্লাহ সো প্লিজ আপনারা দোয়া করবা আর ভালো থাকবা জাযাকাল্লাহ খাইরান প্রোগ্রাম আরম্ভ হয়ে যাবে ইনশাআল্লাহ আসসালামু আলাইকুম
Work and started having talks about organ donation and blood donation, which really does affect our community. In fact, Muslims from all backgrounds, I'm glad to see a great turnout today. I'm working with MOS, like you saw in the MOS, is really the foundation of what the British Islamic Foundation does. We have three aims, and that is to unite, serve, and inspire. This is actually my first time in East London Mosque, and I'm really excited to come here because you guys, despite being in the hub of this amazing, vibrant trading city, have really nurtured a local mosque.
Okay, inshallah, আমরা এখানে অনেক ভাই বোনেরা হল আছেন ইনশাআল্লাহ তো আমি কইমু আমার লিসনা পারে এখানে আছেন তাই পার্ট অফ অর্গানাইজার মাঝে আছেন তো একটু কইবা ইনশাআল্লাহ আজকের এই অর্গান ডোনেশনের সম্পর্কে একটু ইনশাআল্লাহ লিসনাফা Just خليته organize خير خرصوا إن هذا كتاب يفرش.
আমরা خير فرش هذه سبعة. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. আজকে একটা প্রোগ্রাম আমরা ELM করলাম regarding organ donation. Organ donation মানে যে আমরা অনেক জিনিস আমরা বডিতে আছে যে আমরা ডোনেট করতাম পারমু টু সেভ আ লাইফ আর এটা বলতে হইল গিয়া ব্লাড ডোনেশন ইট কুড বি কিডনি ডোনেশন কুড বি টিস্যু ডোনেশন বিকজ অনেক মানুষ আছে যে তারা অনেক অসুস্থ আর ফর এক্সাম্পল কিডনি আমরা সবর থাকে দুইটা কিডনি অনেক মানুষ আছে কিডনি লাগি তারা ওয়েটিং লিস্ট নাইলে তারা মারা যাইবা সো আমরা যদি একটা ডোনেট করি তারা লাইফ সেভ হইব তো উনি আমরা বাঙালি কমিউনিটির মাঝে আমরা খুব কম মানুষ আমরা ডোনেশন দেই বিকজ আমরা এটা একটা স্টিগমা আমরা কমিউনিটির ওয়ারাজ আমরা নেওরা কি NHSও যদি স্ট্যাটিস্টিক দেখুন আপনারা যে ঠিক আমরা কমিউনিটির মাঝে নেই আমরা বেশি ফর এক্সাম্পল ব্লাড ডোনেশন অন্য ডোনেশন আমরা নিতে হেসিটেট করি না বা দিতে আমরা কোথায় যে বিকজ আই থিঙ্ক আমরা একটা স্টিগমা আমরা কমিউনিটির মাঝে আমরা ডরাই যে রক্ত দিলে আমরা রক্ত শেষ হয়ে যাব আমরা মাথা ঘুরাইয়া পড়ে যাব বাট আই থিঙ্ক রক্ত দিলে ইটস লাইক আমরা বডির অটোমেটিক রক্ত বানাই লিব ইনশাল্লাহ বানাইলাই আর অত ক্ষতি করে না আপনার আমরা যদি নিজের ক্ষতি হইতো তারা আমরা গেছে রক্ত নিতেও নাই ইন দ্য ফার্স্ট প্লেস অ্যান্ড অলসো ফর এক্সাম্পল আমরা একটা জিনিস আলহামদুলিল্লাহ আমরা কমিউনিটিতে আমরা নিজের খেয়াল লাগলে ডোনেশন আমরা হেজিটেট করি না বাইরে দিতে বইন্ডে দিতে ফ্যামিলি মেম্বার আমরা দিতে হেজিটেট করি না বা ওয়েন ইট কামস টু দ্য কমিউনিটি আমরা তোরা কিছু ডরাই অ্যান্ড এটা আজকে যে অ্যাওয়ারনেস হয়েছে যে অনেক মানুষের মনে করেন হারাম to give donation. So আজকে যারা ইন্টারেস্টেড যদি অনলাইন জয়েন হইন বা কোনো কোয়েশ্চেন থাকে আপনি কোয়েশ্চেন জিগাইতে পারবা আমরা এই কোয়েশ্চেন তারা ডক্টর যখন আসেন হেলথ ইমাম যখন আসেন তারা কোয়েশ্চেন করইব তারা উত্তর দিবা যদি আপনার কোয়েশ্চেন থাকে কোয়েশ্চেন লিখবা ইনশাল্লাহ অ্যান্ড অলসো আমরা কমিউনিটির মাঝে আমরা অনেক মানুষ আছেন যে বেফটাইন লেবার বোর্ড বেবিও এখন খায় দেন এগেইন তারা এমন কষ্ট হয় যে তারা ব্লাড ট্রান্সফিউশন লাগে সো ইমার্জেন্সি ব্লাড ট্রান্সফিউশন লাগে বিকজ আমরা মানুষের হোম দেন আমরা মানুষের ব্লাড ফাইতে ডিফিকাল্ট আমরা বলতে খালি বাঙালি কমিউনিটি আই মিন লাইক পাকিস্তানি কমিউনিটি আমরা খালা কমিউনিটি আর একটা জিনিস আছে একটা বেমার আছে সিকল সেলস ডিজিজ এটা এফেক্ট করে আমরা বেশাদার সময় আমরা খালা কমিউনিটিত আফ্রিকান কমিউনিটিতে ক্ষতি করে আর অনেক কষ্ট হয় খালা কমিউনিটির মাঝে এটা তার শরীর বেদনা থাকে ইজ সো ডিফিকাল্ট কিন্তু যে স্ট্রাগল করা আমরা বিকজ ডোনেশন তারা যে ব্লাড গ্রুপ ইস মোর আমরা ডোমিনার কমিউনিটি তারা ব্লাড কেটা ট্রান্সফিউশন আনতে খুব কষ্ট বিকজ গিভেজ আর লেস বুঝছনি সো একলাখানি তারা হইতেছে রাখি যে তারা এটা আজকের কনফারেন্স রাখি যে আমরা ওয়ে করতো আমরা এডুকেটেড হইতাম আমরা নলেজ হইতো যে আমরা এফেক্টস কি হইব অনেক আমরা তো হারাম হইয়া বই থাকি বা পারতাম না হইয়া বই থাকি বাট দের আর কনসিকুয়েন্সেস বাট একটা হাদিস আছে ইফ ইউ সেভ এ লাইফ ইউ সেভ এ নেশন বুঝছনি সো সামটাইমস আমরা অনেকটা এফেক্ট করতো না আর একটা জিনিস আছে আজকে কোয়েশ্চেন জিজ্ঞা করইব যে অনেক মানুষ মারা যাওয়া বাদে তারা অর্গান ডোনেশন দিতে পারবানি না পারতা নাই কেজ অনেক মানুষ আমরা লাভ ওয়ান্স মারা গেছেন আমরা আর হাঁটতো না আমরা অর্গান চাই না আমরা জেলা চলা নিতাম কি বলি একটা ব্যাপারে কোয়েশ্চেন হইব আমি এখনও জানলাম না কিতা আনসার ইনশাল্লাহ আপনারা দেখতে থাকবা আর ইনশাল্লাহ খবর পাইবা ইনশাল্লাহ কোনো কোয়েশ্চেন থাকলে জিকাই থাকে আপনার যে আমি ব্লাড ডোনেশন করি আমি আই থিঙ্ক স্টার্ট করছিলাম অ্যাবাউট 10 years ago অ্যান্ড আমার মনে আছে আমার আম্মাই কইতা এল্লা রক্ত দিয়ে আইসে মরি যাব ফরি যাব এল্লা এটা ফারনা ইসলাই মনে করছেন আমি পয়সা লাগি করলাম এটা পয়সা এটা ডোনেশন এমনি আমরা ইয়া দিতাম কেনের বুফ আগে কোভিডও লাগি এটা কিছু I think 2 years ধরে কিছু করছি না বাট ইনশাল্লাহ ইসলাই ফয়লা লাইট হেডেড লাগে বাট ইটস ওকে উইদিন 24 hours ব্লাড হয়ে যায় জি না থ্যাংক ইউ ওকে আসসালামু আলাইকুম জাজাকাল্লাহ খাইরান আফা খুব সুন্দর কইছেন আমরা দেখো একটা জিনিস আপনারা ভাই বোন দেখো আমার আফা যেটা কইছেন আমরা ব্লাড ডোনেশনের লাগে যদি একটু মাতি দেখা যায় আর নিজের যে সময় শরীরও দরকার লাগে আমরা তখন পাগল হয়ে যাই আমরা ব্লাডও দরকার আমরা মার দরকার বইনের দরকার কিংবা আমরা ফ্যামিলির খের দরকার তখন আমরা নিজের ফ্যামিলি থেকে খেয়ে গেছে যদি ফাইট আমরা দিই আলহামদুলিল্লাহ নাইলে আমরা অন্য কাছ থেকে আনি ইভেন পয়সা যদি যত পয়সা লাগুক অসুবিধা না আমরা ব্লাড দিব কিন্তু আমরা শরীরেও যদি রক্ত আছে আমরা চাইলে কিন্তু দিতাম পারি এভরি আই থিঙ্ক 3 মাস বাদে 4 মাস বাদে রক্ত দেওয়া যায় এই শরীরের রক্ত যদি আমরা দেই না ডোনেশন করি আপনার ডোনেশন কারণে আরো জনের উপকার হইব বুঝছেন চিন্তা করে দেখলেন আপনি চাইলে দেশ বিদেশে এই দেশে অনেক আমরা মনে করি যে ইউকের মাঝে এই ব্লাড ডোনেশন দেওয়া যায় না বাংলাদেশে আমি নিজে একটা সংগঠনের মাঝে আছি স্বপ্নদে ফাউন্ডেশন যেখানে আমরা ভাই বোনতে ব্লাড দিন আরও কয়েকটা সংগঠনের লগে আছি আপনারা অনেক ভাই বোন হলে দিন তো সকলে জাজাকাল্লাহ খাইরান আপনারা দিন জানো চিন্তা করে থাকা আপনার শরীরের রক্তর মাধ্যমে যদি একজন বইনের উপকার হয় একটা ফ্যামিলির লাইফ বাঁচে একজন মুমূর্ষ রোগীর উপকার হয় বাঁচে চিন্তা করানি কতক্ষণ সওয়াব পাইবা এই মানুষে যদি যেতখান নেক কাম করবা যেতখান কোরআন তিলাওয়াত করবা ইবাদত বন্দেগী করবা আপনি এটার একটা সওয়াব পাইবা তো আমরা এই জিনিসটা বালা কাম করি না আমরা মনে করি খালি যেন টাকা পয়সা দিলে চ্যারিটি হয় এই ডোনেশন যেন ব্লাড দিয়ে ডোনেশন এটাও কিন্তু চ্যারিটি এখন আজকে যেটা অর্গান আমরা মারা যাওয়ার বাদে ইসলামে কিতাব হয়েছে আমরা শরীরের কিডনি দেওয়া যাইব নি চোখ দেওয়া যাইব নি আতফাও কিতা দেওয়া যাইব নি এটার ব্যাপারে আমার কোনো নলেজ নাই এই নলেজও লাগে আপনারা আজকে প্রোগ্রামটা দেখবা
আমি আপনার প্রোগ্রামের ভিতরে লিয়ে দেই মুগি এখানেও স্কলার হল আসেন এখানেও অনেক ডাক্তার হল আসেন এক্সপার্ট হল আসেন তারা আপনারা কইবা বাট আপনারা প্লিজ ব্লাড কিন্তু দিতে পারবা আর কিছু যদি পারেন না ব্লাডও যদি মনে আপনার শরীরে 1000 ব্লাড নাই মানুষের 80টা দিবা এই দিনে 80 মুখে মাথাইবা এটাও কিন্তু একটা চ্যারিটি রাসূল সাল্লাল্লাহু আলাইহি ওয়াসাল্লাম কোনো মানুষ দেখে লাগে 80 মুখে মাথায় এটাও কিন্তু একটা চ্যারিটি এটাও আমরা সওয়াব হইব খালি টাকা পয়সা মসজিদ মাদ্রাসা রাস্তাঘাট বিল করু খালি চ্যারিটি নাই 80 মুখে খেয়ে লাগে মাথা নিটো চ্যারিটি ওকে আমরা একজন আরেকজন লগে 80 মুখে মাথায় স্পেশালি আমরা ফ্যামিলির লগে ফ্যামিলির বেশি প্রবলেম ওর কারণ একজন আরেকজনের কথা শুনিয়া লইনি মাথা গরম হয়ে যায় প্লিজ মাথা ঠান্ডা করিয়া শান্তিমতে কথা শুনবা ফ্যামিলির লগে মায়া মোহব্বত ফয়দা করবা হাজব্যান্ড ওয়াইফের লগে ফ্যামিলির লগে ভাই বোনের লগে ব্রিটেন থেকে অনেক সময় দেখা যায় আমরা সময় বাংলাদেশও যাই কিংবা আমরা আত্মীয়স্বজন যারা আইন আমরা মনে করি আমরা লন্ডন থেকে গেছি মহা গাছের গোটা হয়ে গেছি আমরা দেশের মানুষের গরিব হলে অনেক সময় ফাত্তা দিই না প্লিজ তারা লগে বালা ব্যবহার করবা তারা লগে মায়া মোহব্বত করবা তারারে আপনি সহযোগিতা করবা 80 মুখে দিবা সহযোগিতা করবা 80 মুখে মাতাইবা দেখবেন এটারও কিন্তু একটা সফ পাইবা আর মনে রাখুন এই যে ব্লাডের ডোনেশন আপনারা হইলাম এই যে রক্তদের ডোনেশন করবা এই রক্তটা কিন্তু কিছুদিনের ভিতরে আপনার শরীরের মাঝে আরবার ফিল আপ হয়ে দিব আপনার রক্ত এবার দেয়া দুঃখা বাদে বুঝবা আপনারা হয়তো আমিনুর চৌধুরী ভাই আপনি দিচ্ছেন যে আমি দিছি আমি জানি যেটা একটু আগে দিস না পাই হয়েছেন হয়তো অনেকে দেওয়ার বাদে মনে করেন কিংবা ফ্যামিলির ইয়া আল্লাহ এগুলো দিলাইছে মাথা ঘুরে কিতা হইব কিচ্ছু হইতো নাই আপনি মরতা না ইনশাআল্লাহ আর মরে গেলে তো বালা ডাইরেক্ট আল্লাহর লগে গিয়ে দেখা করবা ইনশাআল্লাহ আল্লাহর লগে যদি দেখা করতে হয় কিলা দেখা করতাম আমরা সবে চাই কিন্তু আল্লাহর লগে দেখা করতাম হোক একজন মুসলমান চাই না আমরা আল্লাহর লগে দেখা করতাম আমরা সবে চাই আল্লাহর লগে দেখা করতাম সব চাই জান্নাতে যাইতাম বা জান্নাতে যাইতে হইলে কিলা যাওয়া লাগবো মৌত হইতে হইব আপনার আল্লাহর লগে দেখা করতে হইলে মৌত হইতে হইব জান্নাতে যাইতে হইবা তাহলে জান্নাত আর মৌতরে ডরায় রাখেনে তো প্লিজ ডরানোর কোনো দরকার নাই আপনি বেশি বেশি করে যদি সঠিক পথে চলেন ইসলাম কুরআন হাদিস মতাও যদি জিন্দগিরে খাটাইন মৌতরে আপনি ডরাইতা না কারণ আল্লাহ কইছেন কুল্লু নাফসিন যায়কাতুল মউত সকল প্রাণী মানে মরতর স্বাদ গ্রহণ করা লাগবো তাহলে খেনে ডরাইতাম আর আমরা কিতা করি যেনে আমরা বালাফাই জান্নাতে যাইতাম বা জান্নাতে যাইতে মৌত হইতেইব আপনি লন্ডন আইতে হইলে হয় আঠি আইতে হইবা না গাড়ি আইতে হইবা নাইলে হেলিকপ্টারে হেলিকপ্টার আইতে পারতাম না মনে হয় প্লেনে আইতে হইবা লঞ্চে আইতে হইবা ওলাখান কিচ্ছু না কিছু আইতে হইবা বুঝছেন কিতা করাম তো একটা ওয়ে আপনি আওয়া লাগবো তো জান্নাতে যাইতে হইলে আপনার মৌত হইতে হইব তো ডরাই না জানো আর রক্ত দিলে মৌত হইতো না ইনশাআল্লাহ আপনার শরীরে যদি শক্তি থাকে ডাক্তারের পরামর্শ লইয়া প্লিজ রক্ত ডোনেশন করবা ইনশাআল্লাহ অর্গানের ব্যাপারে যেটা এটা যে আমরা এখন তারার লগে মাতমু গিয়া ইনশাআল্লাহ তারার প্রোগ্রামটা শুনমু আমরা প্রোগ্রামে খানিও নিয়ে আইছে খানি চলের আলহামদুলিল্লাহ ওকে ও দেখিল কাইকানো আমরা অনেক বই নাই নকল আইছে ওখানে ওসাইড দেখাইলাই বই নাই নকল রে ও দেখিল কা এই যে বই নাই নকলের মাঝে এখানে অনেক সলিসিটার আছে অনেক টিচার হল আছে জানি না ভলিউম বেশি শোনা যাইব নি বাট আপনারা শুনবা বাদে আপনারা শুনবেন ইনশাআল্লাহ
There's someone called the specialist nurse in organ donation who's involved in the end-of-life care, so we've been involved in terms of discussion about organ donation and then proceeds to theatre, looking after the same patient, and then after, say for example, you proceed to donation, you look after the family and continue to follow up subsequently. It's also an important source of information as well. Next slide, please. I'll start my talk there, but inshallah I'll be happy to answer any questions at the end, inshallah.
Dr. Umar Aziz presenting to us about the optimal flow. There's a lot of misunderstanding in our community. Our next speaker is Mr. Muhammad Khurram, the consultant, transplant and vascular surgeon. And he's going to discuss further about what happens during the process of organ donation and transplantation. He'll explain it further as well.
Assalamu alaikum everybody. My job is made very easy by Brother Omar. He's talked about most of the things that I'm going to touch, at least in the first part of my talk. So I'm going to talk about the process of donation and what happens around the time, before the time, and after the donation. A little bit about the operation itself, And then what really happens to the organs once they've actually been taken from the donor. So I'm talking about what happens during the time of transplantation. Okay. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I'll go through these things one by one. Next slide, please. So what is donation? So donation is basically taking the organs from somebody and giving to somebody else to try and improve their life or save their life. So, so that's the basic concept. And it could be many different organs. It could be livers, kidneys, lungs, hearts. Even blood donation is a kind of a donation. Next slide. Brother has already talked about different types of donation. I'm not going to go into too much of details now, but broadly speaking, there's a living donor and a deceased donor. So living donor is, if I need an organ, my family or my friends, they can donate a kidney or part of a liver if whatever is required. The one thing I stress here is the person who's actually donating, when that person comes in for the process of donation, it is our ultimate responsibility to make sure that we're not going to cause any harm to the live donor, okay? And when I, or any of my other colleagues, when we are working up a live donor, my ultimate responsibility is towards that live donor. I'm not thinking about the recipient, because I want to make sure that we're not going to cause any harm to that person. Okay? And the process of donation is extremely safe these days. And then the next is the deceased donor. So that's the donation once somebody has passed away, and there are two different types of donation. Next slide, please. Like Brother was just mentioned earlier, donation after brain death is when somebody, after a strict criteria, once two different senior clinicians have actually checked that this person, the brain is gone. And the only reason their heart is beating is because they're hooked onto a machine, the ventilator machine, and as soon as you stop the ventilator machine, heart will stop. And the decision to actually donate, it has absolutely no bearing on what kind of treatment they're going to get, or when we're going to say we're going to stop the treatment. The treatment only stops when we think that it is futile, there's no benefit to that patient. We're actually going to do harm to this patient because he's not going to come back, he or she. And that's because once that decision is made, then the specialist nurse in organ donation, so these are based in all the hospitals, and they will get told by the medical team that this person could be a potential donor. We've already made a decision that this person is not going to survive. And then they approach the family and talk to them as to whether they want to go ahead with the donation or not. Okay. What happens during the operation in this kind of donors? Once the decision is made, and if the family is happy and the patient was have not said no to the organ donation before they pass away, then they go to the operation theatre. There is a big team that comes in, and these are the normal surgeons that they would normally do the transplants during the daytime, or as it's like a normal job. And it's like a normal operation. You take them to the theatre, there's an anaesthetist, and you make a cut in the tummy, depending on what organs are required. Those organs are taken away. The process is done in a very dignified way, with utmost respect, because I remember myself when I used to go out for retrieval, taking the organs, you get overwhelmed. It's not just any operation, it's somebody who's actually said that yes, you can do this operation, and take these organs, so that somebody else can actually benefit from this. There's no benefit to that particular person in this world. So there's a lot of you feel really humble when you're actually doing this operation. Once the procedure is finished, the skin and all the muscles and things have been closed off, and there's a dressing on top. So for us Muslims, obviously, when during the funeral, the face is only visible for men. So there's nothing visible. So everything is covered. So there's no visible deformity at all with the donation. Next slide, please. And then the other type of donation is when somebody's heart is stopped. So heart stops in the intensive care unit. And then nobody does anything to that person for 5 minutes to make sure that the heart is really absolutely stopped and they're passed away. And then they get taken to theatre and then the same kind of a process happens. What are the organs that we can take? Previously there was certain concerns about donation after the heart stops, about certain organs, especially heart and lungs, but these days, both these donations you can use kidneys, liver, lungs, heart, cornea, and other tissues. So particularly you can almost take any organ, that depends on the quality of the organ donor. Okay. The operation normally lasts anywhere between 2 to 8 hours, kind of depends on how many organs you're taking, how straightforward or difficult the operation itself is. Next slide, please. Will you touch on this next slide? Next slide, please. Okay, so, yeah, that's fine. So, as I mentioned earlier on, when the medical team is looking after the patients, they're not thinking whether this person is going to be a donor or not. Their ultimate responsibility is to that person who is in intensive care unit on ventilator. So their job, and the only thing that we are thinking at that time is to how I am going to help save
donation Islam wala ase kina na tika ase kina na ikano amdar bro Sheikh Azon asoin tain explain korba inshallah loge takhba jazakallah khairan.
I think we mentioned about these things before. Next slide, please. What happens during the operation? Again, it's done in the most dignified and respectful way. The surgery takes anywhere between 2 to 10 hours, kind of depending on how many organs you're taking. And then once the organs have been taken out, they get either put on ice or different kind of machines these days to try and preserve these organs, because there's a certain time limit that these organs can actually stay outside the body and be still okay to be transplanted. Okay. Next slide, please. Yeah, I already kind of touched on this. The funeral plans are not normally affected by the process of donation. The bodies will return to the family in the same way as it would have happened if the person was not donating. So there's no huge difference there at all. The family will have the opportunity, once the organs have been retrieved, they still have the opportunity to spend some time with the body afterwards. And like I said, you can have an open casket, maybe you can actually, the face can be visible, and there won't be any visible abnormality or any damage to the body. Next slide, please. Okay, so what happens during the transplant? Okay. Next slide. Next slide. Yeah. So before I go into what really happens with the transplant, why do we do transplants? I just got an example here. It's on the right hand side. We all worry about lots of different cancers. You say, okay, cancer is really bad news. Yes. The prostate cancer, thyroid cancer, breast cancer, lymphomas, bladder cancer, kidney cancer, colon cancer. These are one of the most common cancers. People that have these cancers, their chances of surviving is actually much better than somebody who's got kidney failure and they're on dialysis. And this is just a kidney failure. If somebody's got heart failure, that's even worse. If somebody's got lung failure, that's worse. Somebody with liver failure, they only got a few weeks or months to live. So any kind of a transplant is a life-saving treatment. It makes a huge difference. And it's not just the life-saving treatment, it improves the quality of life, you feel much stronger. If you are a child, you grow much better. The chances of improved fertility is actually much better for the males and females. So all these things, they matter. That's why we do transplants. Next slide, please. So for deceased organ transplant, if the process is done mostly out of hours, the patient comes in, they're already on the waiting list, we know that they are suitable to have transplant, and then we prepare them, do blood tests, x-rays, and we see them, the anaesthetist sees them. And once everything is okay, then we look at the organs and make sure that the organs are okay to be transplanted, because there's no point in transplanting an organ which is not right. And once all is done, then we do the operation. Next slide, please. And obviously, every operation is different, and they take different times to do. I'm not going to go into the details of the operations itself, but for a kidney operation, they will be cut on the side of the tummy. For a liver operation, it will be cut on the top of the tummy. For a pancreas and kidney, it will be cut in the middle. Obviously, if you're doing the heart and lungs, the chest will be opened up. And they take different time to do the operations. Next slide, please. On average, depending on what kind of transplants you've had, if everything goes well, you normally stay in the hospital for about 8 to 10 days' time. Everybody is different. There are complexities, again, out of the scope of this talk in here. And then after the transplant, you have to have regular visits to make sure the transplant is working. But that's only for the initial few months. Beyond that, patients with a stable transplant, they only have to come to the hospital once every 2 or 3 months. And they can kind of lead a near normal life. And obviously you have to take medication to prevent your body from rejecting the transplant. Next slide, please. And again, just to stress before I finish, why we talk about organ donation, and why we talk about, I told you why we talk about transplant, because if somebody needs an organ, if they don't get an organ, they will die. And the reason we talk about donation is because of this thing. If you just ignore the last dip from 6,000 to 4,000, you know, the black line on the top, that's because of the COVID. A lot of people got suspended from the waiting list. But if you look at the second last set of bars, so in UK around 3,000 patients get a transplant. But the patients who actually need the transplant, there's around 6,000 of those. So there is still quite a lot of people who need a transplant, and they actually die waiting for a transplant. And just one example before I finally stop talking. If somebody is aged over 55 or 60 and they need a kidney transplant, and if they stayed on the waiting list, so if there were 100 people needing a kidney transplant, they stayed on that waiting list for 5 years, at the end of the 5 years, 50 of them would have passed away if they didn't get a kidney. This is how dire the situation becomes. So I would encourage you to, if you've got smartphones, to scan these QR codes. They talk about so there's animated videos that are made. They talk about the kidney transplant operation, and they also talk about the living donor operation as well. So you can have a look at those. I'm ready to take questions now or afterwards.
Dr. Muhammad Khurram, for your very detailed and comprehensive information about what happened during the process of organ donation and transplantation. I've certainly learned a lot of new things today. Inshallah, you'll ask questions after our next speaker. A lot of you are probably thinking, okay, as a Muslim, am I allowed to donate my organ? So that's why we have an Islamic scholar here. He can, inshallah, address this topic. What is the Islamic perspective on organ donation? We have Sheikh Dr. Mansur Ali. He's an Islamic scholar and lecturer at Cardiff University. But he specializes in this area. I've heard his presentation before, alhamdulillah, very comprehensive. So I'll ask Dr. Sheikh Mansur Ali to give his presentation. And then please make a note of the questions that we'd like to ask to our doctors, to our Sheikh here. Inshallah, they will answer the question.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi hamdan tayyiban kathiran mubarakan fihi. مبارك عليك كما يحب ربنا ويرضى جل جلاله وعم نواله والصلاة والسلام على سيد الحبيب المصطفى وعلى آله وأصحابه نجوم الهدى قادة التقى أما بعد. Respected listeners, organ transplantation medicine is something which frustrates us. It's something which is very eclectically anxiety-ridden because it questions the very core of our identity. What are we as human beings? Are we a conglomeration of disparate body parts, like a car part, where we can just change whenever we need something or take something from someone else, or are we deeper than that? A very interesting article I was reading where a heart transplant recipient couldn't get to say to his wife, "I love you with all my heart." And the alternative, "I love you with all my liver," didn't bode well with her. So you can see that this is kind of a conundrum because it questions the very core of what we are as human beings. Next slide, please. I got interested in this topic. I got interested in this topic when I first came to Cardiff as a lecturer back in 2012, and at that time there was a lot of discussion happening around the Human Transplantation Act 2013, which became law in Wales on the 1st of December 2015. And there was a lot of consultation happening. Cardiff is or Wales, whenever they wanted to enact a new law in the UK, the guinea pig is Wales, right? So they were testing it out in Wales, and I was also a part of the discussion. Nevertheless, on the 1st of December 2015, what happens, the new law kicks in. And as an imam in the community, my phone and email started pinging. People were asking me questions which are very mundane, innocuous questions to more theologically bizarre questions. So they were asking me basic questions like whether organ donation is halal or is it haram? Can we donate after we die? Can we donate to non-Muslims? Can we take from non-Muslims? More bizarre questions related to, if I was to donate my eyes to somebody and that person was to watch pornography, would I be morally culpable for that? All the questions related to, would I be resurrected organless in front of Allah on the Day of Judgment? Would my body feel pain? So I really didn't know the answer to that question. I mean, in my madrasa alimiya training, very vaguely we touched upon this, but in order to be able to give an informed fatwa to people, I needed to know what this is. As an academic, I had the space and the time and the finances to actually research this question. And for the past 4 years, actually, I have been just researching this particular topic. And I have read over hundreds of fatwas in Arabic, English, Urdu, and other languages. And I was able to kind of extrapolate 6 or 7 different views, all contradictory from each other, which are seen as Islamic views. And I will talk about them in a bit, inshallah. Next slide, please. So before we go on to the question of whether organ donation is permissible in Islam, there are certain kind of standard things that we can just discuss. These are facts and then do away with them because they're not really going to change. Number one is xenotransplant is permissible. Xenotransplant basically means taking organs from animals. Okay. Now the technology for xenotransplant is not really advanced. Okay. So you'll get some fatwas where ulama will say that it's not permissible to take organs from human beings, take it from a monkey instead. It doesn't work. The technology isn't there. In 1968, Christian Bernard, the first person to have the surgery in South Africa to have done a successful heart transplant, and the patient lived for 9 days and then he passed away. But the transplant was successful. Before that, he transplanted a monkey's heart into one of his patients, and the patient died straight away. So that's still not available. What we do have is certain tissues and valves that can be taken from animals, even if that is from a haram animal like pig. It's still permissible because in the grand scheme of things that is always better than taking from human beings. But nevertheless, xenotransplant is not developed, therefore we don't really need to discuss that so much. The other thing is that reproductive organs reproductive organs as in genitalia, that is something which is known as novel transplant. Some people it's basically the trans community who is really pushing for that, but the reality is that that technology is very nascent, novel, and certainly it's not come to the UK. So we don't really need to worry about that. More importantly, IVF treatment, which has been around for very long, is permissible as long as the sperm donation or egg donation comes within the marital couple and not from outside. So one is not allowed to get a sperm donor to infiltrate the marital relationship. That is haram. As far as the fatwas in the world is concerned, at the moment, that is haram. I haven't seen a fatwa which says it's halal. Maybe that may change in the future. Womb transplant is permissible. There are differences of opinion on that. I personally think womb transplant is permissible. And one of the first successful womb transplant took place in Saudi Arabia. Donating to and receiving from non-Muslims or someone from the opposite sex is permissible. Sometimes people do ask this question, that is it permissible to donate to non-Muslims? Is it permissible to receive from non-Muslims? But if you don't feel, first of all, when it comes to living donation, when you're alive and you're giving a kidney, then you can actually direct who you want to give your organs to. Certainly in the UK, after death donation, there is no directed donation. Is that correct? You can basically say, oh, I want it only to go to Muslims and no one else. You can't do that, right? That's not permissible legal within the UK law. The question arises because sometimes we feel that kufr, okay, blasphemy and these habits might be transferable and people might imbibe certain kufri qualities, and we get pseudoscience saying that somebody received a transplant from somebody who was an alcoholic, and then this person became kind of a pathological drunkard afterwards. These are the exceptions, they're not the rule. Okay, I was asked this question at a conference in Edinburgh quite a few years back, whether it is permissible for Muslim mothers to take milk from UK milk banks to give to their Muslim children. So I responded to this question by saying, I don't know about the rest of the world, but at least for the UK, any milk which is donated to a UK milk bank is pasteurized for 30 minutes at 60 degrees. If there was any kufr in it, would have been boiled out. Okay. So, jokes aside, donating and receiving from men and women, from Muslim and non-Muslim, it is permissible. Number 5, not receiving an organ does not make one more pious and religious, and not donating does not make one less pious. This is something very, very important. Just because somebody does not donate when somebody can donate, there is no moral culpability. Okay, you do not need to donate, and it doesn't make you less pious. And just because somebody requires an organ and does not receive that organ, even if there was one, then that doesn't make them more pious. This has got nothing to do with religiosity. Buying and selling organs is haram. If one needs an organ or one is to give an organ, it has to be purely for altruistic reason and not for any financial gains. Next slide, please. As I mentioned that in my research of 4 years, and I don't think, I can make this claim other than 1 or 2 scholars. I don't think anybody, at least in the UK, has researched this topic in depth more than me. So I can say that I'm an Islamic expert on this topic. And in my opinion, I have extrapolated 6 or 7 different opinions, and I can say that every single one of those opinions are valid Islamic opinions, even though they are contradictory. And that is not because of an indecisiveness on my part to make up my mind. It's just because we don't have something which is written in stone from the Quran and Sunnah saying, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu kutiba alaykum zawatul a'dha, that all you who believe, you have to donate your organs, or Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu hurrima alaykum zawatul a'dha, that all you who believe organ donation is haram. What we do have is certain generic concepts in the Quran which are so abstract that depending on who is reading them, then people can interpret them according to their own presuppositions, according to their own biases, own doxa, own anxieties, own fears, own worldview and upbringing. For example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ, we have dignified the human being. Now, that means that the human being has dignity, irrelevant of whether they're Muslim or non-Muslim. Now, when a person finds out that in the process of organ transplantation, let's say cadaver organ transplantation, donation after death, the surgeons need to cover the body, okay, and they need to extrapolate the organs, retrieve the organs from that person. Somebody might say that this dead body, okay, this person who's dead now, deceased, the honorable thing and the right thing to do is to deposit him into the earth, because minha khalaqnakum wa fiha nu'idukum wa minha nukhrijukum taratan ukhra. That's the right thing to do. And therefore, any kind of intervention into the body is seen as an assault and a violation of that dignity. And therefore, organ transplantation goes against وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. But somebody else can also say, well, actually, this person is, once we put this person in the ground and then after 2 weeks the body gets decomposed, there are vital organs which can benefit at least 9 different people, and then from that person, with the person's consent and the family's consent, and give it to others for life to carry on, is honoring and dignifying that human being that human being lives on in others. And therefore, from the Quranic principle of وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ, organ transplantation is halal. Now, do you see how? So there are many of these verses in the Quran. There is nothing in the Quran and Hadith which directly talks about whether organ transplantation donation is halal or haram. Therefore, I found in the fatawas, all of them, I would say, are Islamic positions. They are not the Islamic positions, they are an Islamic position. And whichever one people take, then that is an Islamic position. There is no moral culpability on them. Now, then which one do we take? So I'm going to use the tactics of what doctors do, GPs. When you go to the GPs, they don't really give you advice. They give you informed choices and say, you've got this choice, you've got this option, you've got this option, you've got this option. They explain everything to you, and you need to make a judgmental decision on that. Afterwards, after finding out all the different options that's available, you can go to your imams, your chaplains, your muftis, right? And then you can explore your personal situation. I cannot give a blanket fatwa that there is one Islamic position or on this situation, because what we have is a myriad of opinions. The very first fatwa on organ transplantation was in 1925. So you can see that it's very, very new. Okay, next slide, please. So the 6 or 7 different positions that I extrapolated, the very first one, which is that it is haram to donate and it is haram to receive, that is a principal position. Yeah, you can live with that. I'm not going to take and I'm not going to give. That's fine. That's a principal position. The second one, which there's a cross there, halal to receive, haram to donate. This is a view which is kind of diminishing. More, if I can take, then why can I not give? Okay? If I can take, then why can I not give? Morally, it seems to be a repugnant position, but legally speaking, within Islamic law and also the UK law, legally it's a fine position, right? Just because there was a time I needed charity, now I am rich, doesn't mean that I have to legally give something. So similarly in the UK law, just because you receive an organ doesn't necessarily mean that you have to give an organ. You are not legally obliged. It might be a moral thing that people save you, you should also save people. Israel, I think, is the only country in the world which has this reciprocal system where you go on the shorter list if you are willing to donate. Okay? But the two positions at the end are, the end one is it is halal to donate and it is halal to receive. That is the position which is becoming more dominant, and that is the position which is the opinion of the a lot of the major scholars and Muslim governments in Turkey, in Malaysia, in Indonesia, in Singapore, a lot of the scholars in 3 minutes. Okay. A lot of the scholars in different parts of the world, but the loggerhead basically is on. We basically have a schedule. In my time, okay, that's fine. Okay, that's fine. So the loggerhead position is with the brain stem death. Okay, brainstem death is a very peculiar situation which has been created by modern technology. You wouldn't get a situation where, before the ventilators, which is the early 19th century, where you will have a brain death situation, because a person will die straight away. It is because of ventilating machine we can keep people artificially pumping blood and oxygen through their body, so without and they are dead. Okay, so it's what we call a between and betwixt situation. It is a situation which is created by modern technology. Now the ulama community in the world, they are on two different opinions on this, and this is a bottleneck situation. It is a loggerhead situation, and there is actually no workaround this. You have to either accept that brainstem death is actual death, and it's death seen in the Sharia. Accept that, and then you can accept that brainstem death organ retrieval is permissible, or you basically say, no, I don't believe that brainstem death is Shari death, and therefore taking declare neurologically determined death using neurological criteria are not actually dead, and you're actually killing people. There is no other way around it, and the ulama are basically in two different camps, and you will see many great scholars on both camps. So this is a loggerhead situation. There is actually no way around that. So I'm going to move on. Next slide, please. So for organ donation to be permissible is the idea of altruism and charity. in the Quran. Again, this is generic. The Prophet ﷺ says, "Kullu ma'rufin sadaqah," that every good thing is sadaqah, and therefore donating one's organ for altruistic reasons is also seen as sadaqah. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay. And the next slide, please. Right, so sometimes people basically say, well, which madhab are we talking about? Okay, so my answer to that is that we're not actually talking about madhabs, because the madhab scholars, the Hanafi, Shafi'i, Maliki, they did not actually discuss this. This is a modern concept, and if we were to take any one madhab, I will give you 8 different positions from the Hanafi school of law. Okay, so it is not a madhab-based position. Next question, please. Some people basically say, well, isn't it better to rely on our qadr and die? Okay, so the answer to that is, well, that would be the same response to every kind of medication, isn't it? Why do we need to take paracetamol or metformin or some other kind of medicine? Or shouldn't we just base ourselves on qadr? So, if organ transplantation is not a cure, at least it's, to a certain extent, it's life-saving technology. So it comes under whether medicine is permissible or not, and we know that it is permissible because the Prophet ﷺ medicated himself, and the Prophet ﷺ says that there is not a single medicine but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given a cure for that. Similarly, we find in the hadith of Musnad Imam Ahmad, the Prophet ﷺ came to visit his uncle Abbas who was suffering from excruciating illness one day, and he was moaning and saying, "Oh, I wish that I died." And the Prophet ﷺ said, "My uncle, do not wish for death, wish for life, because if you are a good person, then you will have had the extension to do more good. And if you're a bad person, then you would have been given the opportunity to do tawbah." Okay, so life is always better than dying. Do I have finished? Okay, because there are some pertinent. Next slide, please. Yeah. This is one of the kind of pinch point for the Muslim general public, that the body feels pain after death. Okay. Well, from an Islamic perspective, from a Quran and Hadith perspective, there is nothing, and this is from somebody who has gone through a complete Aliyah training, okay, of 7 years reading, right? Somebody who's done a degree from Al-Azhar University in Cairo, somebody who's done a master's in Hadith and a PhD in Hadith. Take it from me that there is nothing in the Quran and Sunnah that actually says that the dead feel pain. Okay, at least when you're handling. Some people say, well, when we are washing the dead body, then we have to be so careful, right? Because the ruh feel pain. It's not because the ruh feel pain. The fiqh books do say you have to be careful. It's because the person who just passed away, the way we will honor that person, and the way that we will not violate the dignity of that person, right? Similarly, in death, where the person cannot protect himself, we do not make the person naked. We extend the same dignity to the person after death, and not because of any kind of pain perception or anything. There's a false hadith going around that when a fly sits on a dead body, then it's kind of more painful than an elephant. I have no idea where that comes from. So there is actually no dalil from the Quran and Sunnah on this. Next slide, please. Would we be resurrected organless? Okay, this is another thing that really agitates people, and one of the reasons why this question arises is because we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, اليوم نختم على أفواههم وتكلمنا أيديهم وتشهد أرجلهم بما كانوا يكسبون. that today is the day where we will put a zip on their mouths, and their feet and their hands will testify to what they were doing. Our limbs and our organs will testify to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The womb will testify to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment. So people are anxious that if these limbs are missing, then how will they testify on the day of judgment to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Well, my response to that is, well, thank goodness the limbs are missing, because if you know, our limbs testify, then we're actually in big trouble. Okay? But jokes aside, the real that we really don't know the nature of resurrection. If you look in the Quran and Sunnah, we know that we will be resurrected. Allah talks about this. We will be resurrected. Do people that we can also resurrect people from their fingertips. We know that resurrection happens, but what is the actual nature of that resurrection, we really don't know. It's certainly not going to be this body, right? Because 2 weeks into the ground, this body is decomposed, right? It's certainly, so we don't know a new body, or if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to make us some other way. What we do know, and I'm finishing here, what we do know from the hadith is that we will be resurrected in our natural state. In the Riyadh Salihin, we find the hadith of the Prophet Sahih Muslim, that the Prophet says, all of you will be resurrected in your natural state. Circumcised men will have their foreskins back again. So any limbs that were missing, you will have them back again. We know that from the hadiths. Now there are certain hadiths which basically does say that people will be missing their limbs, but those are more for spiritual sins. If somebody was a perpetual liar, their tongue will be missing. If somebody used to then their eyes will be missing. But these hadiths are actually very weak. Okay? But certainly not because of limbs missing. But we have the very famous story of Ashab al-Ukhdud al-Nadidat al-Waqud, right? The people of the trench who were all, the entire community was burnt, okay, to a cinder, because they were believers. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that they are saved. We know of a hadith in the Sahih al-Bukhari that a person sinned all of his life, and at the end of his death he told his children that cremate my body and throw my ashes into the water because I want to go in front of Allah. Allah finds this person and says, my slave, why did you do this? And he said, Ya Allah, I have sinned all my life and I am so embarrassed to come in front of you that I told my children to go and throw my ashes and scatter them. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say, my servant, if you have that aqidah and belief towards me, go, I save you and I give you Jannah. What that basically means is to be, as one of the questions here, to be buried intact or even to be buried is not necessarily a correlation for salvation. There is actually really no relationship between them. Okay, I'm not advocating cremation here, but what I'm saying is to be buried has really got no relation to salvation. What about the people who've been, dead at sea? What about people who've been, lost in the jungle? What about people who have been eaten by animals? They should eat. Okay, so and finally, and I'm finishing here. Finally, the point here is that how do we scientifically prove resurrection? How do we? To my mind, in my wildest dream, I cannot prove resurrection scientifically. The fact that there is life after death, there is Jannah and Jahannam, these are things which transcend physics. These are metaphysical things. That if these are metaphysical things, then if we can accept life after death and resurrection, then why are we so, why are we become so stringent on the fact that, oh, we need to have an organ or else we're going to be resurrected organless, right? How does that make sense? I will finish here. There were 2 more slides on our bodies belong to Allah, then how do we give that away, and then mutilation and deprivation. But I will leave that. Jazakumullah khair, and we'll take answers, inshallah.
I can understand that this topic is, especially this Islamic perspective, is Really big. I mean, he can talk all day on this subject because of the extensive research that he has done. I mean, I was in a session with him with the scholars, so there he explained in a different, more scholarly way. For us laymen, alhamdulillah, was very clear what he said. I think we've got our answer. I mean, the main issue was whether it's halal or haram, and he answered that question. I think it's quite clear. So he said it's a choice. So he left it to us, saying if you want to give, you can. If you don't, it's up to you. But there are some scholars who disagree. As usual, we have difference of opinion on many other issues as well. Now we have a question and answer session for next 10, 11 minutes. I think he answered most of the pertinent questions. Still, if you have any questions, you can raise your hand. And have we got a mic? Yeah? Okay, so I can see Sister Jusna, if you've got a question. Brother Shakir, yeah, has a question. So let's start with these two, inshallah. Keep on.
The question I've got is, can we give permission on behalf of our loved ones to donate their organs after they have passed away?
Okay, that's one question. Let's take, if you can make a note of that, please, Dr. Shakir.
Jazakallah khair. It's a very informative session. Jazakumullah, three of you. I got two questions actually. One for the medical professionals. Obviously, we see that from the graphs there's a need for the donation. But is there any intensive, like every time government or NHS they do something, motivate people to do that? There is an intensive. I'm not talking about the financial intensive. Any sort of incentive to people come up and take the donation and encourage to donate the organs. That's that for the medical professionals. And for the Sheikh, I got a question about we see when I'm alive, if I donate in life, I see there is a benefit, I can choose myself, I can donate or not. That's from the Islamic perspective, or obviously for why you make the fatwa, that's a choice. But after the death, my family or my next to kin, how they going to take that decision, that situation? Because I'm not alive in this world anymore to make decision on behalf of myself. The decision will be made by someone else from the family. How they take that situation? Are they allowed to take that kind of decision on behalf of something they don't belong to? They don't have belongs to those kind of things. Jazakallah.
I think both of the sisters' question and the brother's questions are the same. Can we give permission on behalf of our loved ones? I think one of the things is that people need to kind of take ownership of their religiosity in the same way that we take ownership of our financials. We need to take ownership of our religiosity, and we need to start talking about these things. One of the reasons why there is a disquiet, with organ transplantation is because it makes us think of our mortality. It makes us think about death. Now, in the Muslim community, we talk about death quite a lot, right? But we talk about it in an abstract manner, okay? We're talking about death as a concept, but not really my death. When people start really looking into themselves and start thinking about their own mortality, right, it's really scary. So people would rather be interested in watching EastEnders rather than talk about their own mortality, right? So I think we need to have these serious conversations with our family members, and whatever position we take, we need to let our decisions be known to our family members, okay? And family members can take Islamically, can give permission on behalf of the loved ones. There is, but the fatwa is that all of the family members have to agree. Okay, all of the family members have to agree. If there are certain family members who don't agree, then this will basically be seen as immediate family members. Immediate family members who are adult have to agree. But I think before it leads to that stage, then people need to have discussions. There are some differences of opinion among on whether parents are allowed to donate the organs of their children. From an Islamic point of view, there is more leaning towards that it's not permissible, right? Because of how consent and things work. But certainly for adults, it is permissible. But rather than trying to second guess what your loved one will want, it's better to have the conversation with them. Thank you.
Question about incentives, I guess we can divide it into two parts. So incentive for the living donors and incentive if you're on the deceased donation list. So for the living donors, there's no financial incentive. It's illegal. But if, say for example, and it's a very common situation that we see here in this community, if say for example I need an organ and I don't have a living donor in UK, I can ask my family member from Pakistan to come and donate an organ in here. The trust will help with the visa. They will help with the financial stay in here. But there's no as in kind of money that's given. In terms of the deceased donation, again, there is no financial incentive. What we do see very often is if a family member or a family has actually said yes to donation, and for some medical reason the donation does not go ahead, they feel really dejected, they feel really depressed because they've already lost a loved one, they're already going through quite a lot, and they see organ donation as a way to actually help 6, 7, 8, or 9 different people, and when that possibility of actually helping other people goes away, that becomes quite depressing. So I guess maybe it's a roundabout way of saying yes, there is that incentive. That's the psychological incentive rather than a financial incentive. If a living donor, a person who is donated, so if I donate a kidney and for some reason I get an injury to my other kidney, with an accident and lose the other kidney as well, I would be on dialysis, okay? Otherwise I won't survive. Because I've already donated a kidney, I would then go right at the top of the deceased donation list. So I don't have, so normally in UK, there is about 2.5 to 3 years wait before you get a kidney organ because we don't have enough donors. But if a person like the situation you explained, they will go around.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add to what your brother was saying about the family making that decision. One of the reasons we do this work and engage with our Muslim community and inform you is because we want you to make an informed choice. But that informed choice happens now. The second part of that is for you to engage with your loved ones and tell them what that choice is. Don't put the pressure on them to be at that stage where they've just lost you and then they have to make that decision, because that's not when they want to be engaging in that conversation. So we ask you to do a pre-event questionnaire and then we're going to ask you to do a post-event questionnaire. It's really important that you do that because we want to know what your opinion is so we can gauge how the work that we're doing, is it making a difference? Not a difference in will you donate, but are you informed to make the choice that you want to make? And it has to be engaging your family members. Don't put them in a position where they have to make that decision for you. Speak to them. So we want to ask you to pledge. You know when you go to charity events and you pledge however amount, and you need to. We want you to pledge to have this conversation with your family when you get home. We would like for you to do that and then give us feedback how that conversation went. That's really important. Only 1% people will die in circumstances where they can actually be organ donors. That's hardly anything. But they're not, those people are not young bikers that have had hereditary, they're likely to be middle-aged, over 50-year-olds that have had a stroke, which is kind of like this audience here today. So it's really important that we have this conversation with our family.
The adhan is going to go in 2 minutes, so we'll have to take a break for the adhan, then maybe we'll take another 5 minutes. And after that, there'll be a video running that people can see, inshallah. So we'll just have time for 2 more questions. One brother, there's another brother there? Okay. So one brother and one sister here. We'll take, inshallah. I don't know whether we have enough time to answer. Okay, go on, brother.
Okay, assalamu alaikum, and thank Jazakallah for arranging this important seminar. I have, in fact, 3 questions, very short 3 questions. First of all, whether is there any leaflet or booklet or printed materials on Islamic perspective? What are the scholars are thinking? Is there any booklet so that we can have it and we can read again and go through? And next question is, what is the position of the British law in organ donation? See, if anybody would like to opt out, what is the situation? This is the second question. Third question is, usually when a person dies, usually we look at the face. If the cornea is taken from the body, whether it will look deformed, the face will look deformed. So these are the 3 questions.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
Inshallah, we'll take a couple more questions. I understand there's a sister who is a patient. She's on dialysis. We'll give priority to her, inshallah. Her question, and maybe one of the sisters can ask. And the salah is at 7:30, and some people need to make wudu and the profession a bit early, inshallah. So, yes, sister, go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm here today as somebody who wants to give a testimony about how important organ donation is in our community. I was 4 weeks old when I was diagnosed with kidney cancer in 1984, and I went through a whole series of surgery. I'm now, alhamdulillah, nearly 38 and very well because of the medical, the miracles of medical science that Allah has given us. Today I'm here to talk about my friend Nasima, who is sitting here next to me. She is 28. 2 years ago, she was diagnosed with a disease called IgA nephrectomy, also known as Burgess syndrome. And she had sudden kidney failure. She's been well otherwise most of her life. And now she's on full dialysis every single day. We're coming into almost the 3rd year, and she was told that she needs to find a kidney as soon as possible to help with her prognosis and keep her healthy and strong. Inshallah, I would love to have everybody's support in trying to push this story for my friend and understand how important organ donation is in our community. And it's not just the elderly who are affected, it's also our young. That's all I've got.
That was an appeal to everybody. Shall I say, there's a sister there, ask a question? And then final question from Alima, and then we'll not take any more questions.
Assalamu alaikum, I just have a quick question. 2 questions. The first one is the Sheikh mentioned in terms of, I know it might not be slightly related, but the donation of like breast milk and accepting that or not. In terms of like rida'a, how does that come into effect? Does that still apply? How would you know if relations, etc.? And then the question to the doctors is, in terms of transplants, if, let's say, rejected, would, once you've done the operation obviously, would you then be able to take that organ and use it for someone else, or is that completely not a possibility?
Okay. The sister there, please make your question very brief, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum, brother. I wanted to ask, so there's a Quranic verse, chapter 5, verse 32, if any saves a life, it is as if he has saved all of mankind. But then there's also a hadith where Muhammad, peace be upon him, said breaking the bones of a dead person is like breaking the bones of a living person. So how would you interpret this in regards to organ donation, and which should be followed? My second question is, with regards to organ donation as ongoing charity, if the person who has received the organ becomes a bad person, would that still be considered ongoing charity?
Okay. The final one.
Dilawar, thank you so much, and it's been really interesting to hear. I just a couple of things. First of all, around that personal choice. If we still are discussing people having a personal choice around this, we're still in danger of communities like ourselves who are still unable to kind of come to terms with things like donations. So I'm wondering if there is something planned to help us maybe give a bit more stronger message around that, and also just something you were saying about the work you're doing in sort of educating our communities about that, what else we could do. So for example, things like Jummah Khutbahs and bringing these conversations to the masses and how we could do that. Just medically, a couple of questions. One which is around what is the rejection rate for organ donations? And the other was around, is there an age limit, for example, those that are elderly, after which you pass the age of donation? Thank you.
Okay, so we have a maximum 5 minutes, so the 1 minute, very quickly, inshallah. The one question about booklet, the one about how to opt out, the very simple one, and then like taking out cornea before people.
Just address the medical questions first of all. So first of all, asked about the law, talked about the law earlier on. Although you have the option of opting out, but ultimately your family will always get asked as to what your last wishes were, inshallah, because and that takes precedence without a doubt. So you have the option opting out. Corneal transplantations, they take the front of your eye, so you shouldn't see too much deformation of deceased individual from that. In terms of rejection rates, it's very variable depending upon exactly what organ it is, in terms of whether it's kidneys. It depends upon the patient factors, whether they had previous donations or not, or recipients or not, and they might have developed antibodies. So there's a multitude of factors that might affect how successful a particular organ is in a particular patient. So broadly, it's very variable. And the same question about whether you can use the same organ and transplant it in someone else if it's been rejected. What happens, your immune system attacks the organ, so that organ itself fails. So unfortunately, you can't use the same organ in a different patient. If that makes sense.
Thank you. To answer backwards, a stronger message, do we need a stronger message? I think the stronger message has to come from statistics, where the religion basically permits now, in order to kind of motivate people and incentivize, I think the statistics, that's where the stronger message has to come from. Donating an organ or donating any sadaqah after death is a sadaqah in and of itself, irrelevant of whether people benefit from them. If people benefit from them, then there is additional thawab rewards. If they don't, still that is a sadaqah. It doesn't stop being a sadaqah. The hadith of Ibn Majah, breaking the bones of the living, breaking the bones of the that hadith is a very particular context, and actually it's taken out of context. Context number one, there's actually a number of contexts. Context number one is that mutilation was seen as a war strategy. Okay, in pre-Islamic Arabia, bodies were mutilated in order to harm the living. So we find a very famous case of Hind, she becomes a Muslim, but in the Battle of Uhud, what she does is she kills Hamza, gets Hamza killed, takes his heart out, and she chews his heart. And in that way, by chewing the heart of Hamza radiallahu ta'ala anhu, she's not harming Hamza, she's harming the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that look what I'm doing, I'm mutilating. So mutilation always has a maleficent, malignant intention situated with it. But there is, this hadith also has a more kind of immediate context, and that is that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam read a janazah over a companion, and they were burying this companion in the Jannatul Baqi'. The undertaker, the grave digger, was digging the grave. Jannatul Baqi' is a very old graveyard, and the grave digger found a piece of a shin, of a bone of a earlier resident of that grave. So now, rather than the grave digger taking out that bone and putting it somewhere else, it was already brittle. So what he did was, with his spade, he pummeled the bone, and it just turned into dust. When the Prophet ﷺ saw this, he said, breaking the bones of the dead is like breaking the bones of the living. So it has a particular context. A third context to that is Amr bint Abdurrahman, who is a student of Aisha radiallahu ta'ala, says to her son, Muhammad, when she dies, she says that when I die, do not bury my body in the public cemetery, rather bury my body in our private ground. This is the motto of Imam Malik. The reason why is because I don't want my body to be robbed by grave diggers. There was a point where grave diggers used to stake out funerals and janazas, and then after the people have buried the body, what they used to do was they used to go and dig them out to sell the shroud, the kafan, and sometimes they needed to break the bones. Right? The illah, or you say Islamically, the test case is on breaking the bones of the living. So breaking the bones of the dead is like breaking the bones of the living. And we know that there are situations where you need to break the bones of the living in order to preserve somebody's life. So the hadith is not absolute, right? The hadith is not absolute. There are situations where it becomes necessary to break the bones of the living. Finally, the question related to Radaha. There's difference of opinion on this, whether the milk relationship is established. There is an opinion in the Hanafi school of thought that if there are confusion over where the milk comes from, and many different women's milk are mixed, and therefore as a result of this you don't know who the actual donor is, then this milk kinship does not get established. That is one opinion found in Al-Ikhtiyar by Imam al-Mawsili in the Hanafi school. Thank you.
We have 2 minutes left. Jazakumullah khair, brothers and sisters, for coming to this program. Someone said actually, and I agree, except that if we are not willing to give, we should not take. Okay, so that's another way of looking at it. That's fair, isn't it? You can take but cannot give. So you can say, if you are not willing to give, don't take it. That's a fair way of dealing with it. But it's a very important topic. We need to discuss it more, especially with our scholars.
The chances are that you will need an organ more than you will actually get to take. That's right, medically.
Yeah. So the Sheikh said the chances are that we are more likely to take than give, and that's what the statistics are saying. Okay, inshallah, jazakumullah khair. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Thank you very much to all of us.
Assalamu alaikum. আপনারা সকলে যেন আজকে প্রোগ্রামটা দেখছেন আর এটা থেকে শাখে ওখানে কইছেন যে এটি লাগি আমরা চয়েস এন্ডে দিকে কইছেন এটা আমরা চয়েস আর যদি হজন মানুষের যদি আপনার কিছু দেওয়ার থেকে যদি খের উপকার হয় এটার সবটা আপনি অবশ্যই পাইবা তাওকে আমরা আল্লাহর কাছে দোয়া করি যেন আল্লাহ আমরা সকলের হেফাজত করতা সুস্থ রাখতা ভালো রাখতা আর ঈমানের সাথে মত করতা সবচেয়ে বড় জিনিস হলো কি খামনা রহমান আপনি মারা যাওয়ার বাদে আপনার এই বডির লগে কোনো সম্পর্ক থাকতো না আপনার রূহের লগে থাকবো আপনার ঈমানের লগে আপনার আমলের লগে থাকবো তা আমরা কাছে আল্লাহর কাছে তাতে আল্লাহ আমরা মাথা কথা বলিলে মাফ করে দিবা
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا